When you're immersed in your favourite titles, it can be easy to forget there's a whole bunch of legal work that goes into them. Trademarks, licensing, and contractual obligations are all things that companies need to think about when putting out a new game. And so it's unsurprising that the industry attracts lawsuits like bees to honey. Sometimes these lawsuits are completely warranted and ensure that those who have been taken advantage of by a developer, publisher, or otherwise get the justice they deserve. Other times, though, well, they're just silly, quite frankly. For this list, we're taking a look at some of the dumbest and most frivolous lawsuits the games industry has ever seen. Please do bear in mind, though, that while we've done all we can to ensure the accuracy of these entries, we're not lawyers ourselves, so if we've gotten any fancy legal terms muddled, then we do apologise. I'm sure you'll all understand what we're getting at, regardless. I'm Peter from TripleJump, and here are the 10 most ridiculous video game lawsuits. Number 10. Lindsay Lohan vs. Grand Theft Auto 5. In the early to mid-2000s, Lindsay Lohan was one of the biggest young stars in Hollywood. However, as the decade drew to a close, Lohan's image took something of a nosedive following a string of incidents involving the law, and her career has never really recovered. You'd think then that she'd be keen to stay away from courtrooms, but in 2014, she decided to sue the devs behind Grand Theft Auto 5. Why? Well, because she reckoned they'd modelled a character, actress Lacey Jonas, on her. Lohan claimed that Take-Two and Rockstar had used her likeness without permission in order to drive up sales, because, GTA really needs help in that department, and had modelled the character on a photo of her in a red bikini. She also alleged that Lacey Jonas's hat was similar to one that she herself owned, and that the character's peace sign pose was a bit of a trademark of hers. Because, of course, those are the two things people most closely associate with Lindsay Lohan. Unsurprisingly, the lawsuit went nowhere, with the court declaring that the character was simply a generic 20-something woman without any particular identifying physical characteristics. I mean, some might say that's exactly what Lindsay Lohan is. Oh, got him. Got her. Oh well, at least Lindsay still has her film career, right? Number 9. Bethesda vs. Mojang. Over the years, a number of famous faces have tried to lay claim to certain words. Paris Hilton trademarked the phrase, "that's hot," Taylor Swift tried to trademark 1989, and Kylie Jenner failed to trademark Kylie after Kylie Minogue's lawyers blocked the attempt. It would also seem that the games industry isn't immune to such tomfoolery, as in 2011, Bethesda sued Mojang after the latter attempted to trademark the name Scrolls, which was to be used for their collectible card game. Bethesda claimed this would infringe on their Elder Scrolls trademark, and that consumers might get confused by the name of Mojang's card game and think it was part of the Elder Scrolls series. In an attempt to resolve the issue without having to take things to court, Mojang head honcho Notch challenged Bethesda to a game of Quake 3, asserting that if they won, Mojang would change the name, and if they lost, Mojang would get to keep it. Bethesda did not respond. The lawsuit was actually settled fairly amicably in the end, though. Bethesda got to keep the trademark, and Mojang got to keep on calling their game Scrolls, just as long as they promised they wouldn't create an Elder Scrolls competitor using the name. Number 8. Iron Maiden vs. 3D Realms. Love them or loathe them, it's hard to deny that Iron Maiden are one of the most successful heavy metal bands in the world. Their 5-decade career has seen them release 17 studio albums, sell out scores of live shows, and brand everything from t-shirts to beer with the Iron Maiden name. Clearly, though, all of that success wasn't enough, as they decided to go after 3D Realms, claiming their early access shooter, Iron Maiden, was imitating the Iron Maiden trademark. They alleged that consumers would assume that Iron Maiden had something to do with the band and/or their mobile game, Iron Maiden Legacy of the Beast. They also somewhat tenuously claimed that the font used for the Iron Maiden logo was similar to the one used for their own, that the name of the protagonist, Shelley Harrison, was a play on their bass player Steve Harris's name, and that the skull icon was similar to their mascot Eddie. Stretch before you leap, eh lads? The band demanded $2 million in damages, injunctions preventing 3D Realms from registering the logo or trademark, and for any physical items bearing them to be destroyed. Rather than take things to court though, 3D Realms decided to simply rename the game Ion Fury. Number 7. Edge Games versus anything with the word edge in the title. If you thought Bethesda getting upset over someone using the word scrolls in their game was silly, just wait until you hear about Edge Games' lawsuit-happy shenanigans. Unlike most video game companies, which are famous for, making video games, Edge Games' claim to fame is the ridiculous number of lawsuits they've tried, and generally failed, to bring against others. Over the years, Edge Games have tried to take on a number of industry giants, claiming that their use of the word edge is infringing upon their trademarks. They've gone after Namco for Soul Edge, New World Computing for Planet's Edge, and Razer for the Razer Edge, to name but a few. Perhaps their most infamous move, though, was filing a trademark infringement suit against EA for Mirror's Edge, alleging that EA had done this on purpose in order to unfairly compete with Edge Games. EA responded with a counterclaim that argued that Edge Games had obtained their trademarks fraudulently, and the company was forced to abandon several of them on the grounds they hadn't used them beyond, quote, trolling various game-related industries for licensing opportunities, end quote. It's not often we side with EA, but, when they're right, they're right. Number 6. Universal Studios versus Nintendo. We're going back 40 years now as we take a look at Universal Studios versus Nintendo, one of the earliest ridiculous lawsuits in gaming. In 1982, Universal City Studios decided to sue Nintendo Co. as they claimed that Donkey Kong was an infringement of King Kong, and consumers might be confused and think that the two were associated with one another. At the time, Nintendo was still an up-and-coming company, and so were initially inclined to settle. However, after a bit of digging, Nintendo found the smoking gun that they needed, and the company chose to face Universal in court. But what was this magnificent butt-saving piece of information that Nintendo unearthed? Well, it was that Universal Studios didn't actually own the rights to King Kong to begin with, and had even previously proven in court that King Kong's plot and characters were in the public domain. Judge Robert W. Sweet ruled that, at best, Donkey Kong was a parody of King Kong, and ultimately, Nintendo emerged victorious. They thanked their lawyer, John Kirby, by gifting him a $30,000 boat named Donkey Kong, exclusive worldwide rights to use the name Donkey Kong for sailboats, and by naming one of their most iconic characters after him. That's right, the little pink ball we all know and love as John. Oh, there he is. Number 5. Nintendo versus Blockbuster. If you're old enough to remember Blockbuster, you'll likely have fond memories of popping into the store and paying a couple of quid to rent a few VHSs or even the latest video games for a few days. You know who doesn't have fond memories of that though? Video game companies, because if you were renting a game, you weren't shelling out tens of dollary dues to own it, were you? Sadly, there wasn't a lot these companies could do about it, but what they could do was file nitpicky lawsuits for other minor infractions instead. This is exactly what Nintendo of America tried to do in an attempt to stick it to Blockbuster. In 1989, Nintendo filed a suit that alleged that several Blockbuster stores were photocopying game manuals when renting out Nintendo titles, which they claimed was intellectual property infringement. Blockbuster were less than pleased about the suit, and believed that Nintendo had only filed it because they were upset about being removed from the Computer Software Rental Amendments Act. Their continued inclusion would have prevented retailers from renting out Nintendo titles, forcing customers to buy their games instead. In the end though, Blockbuster agreed to stop photocopying the manuals, and both companies settled out of court. Nintendo didn't get re-included on the Computer Software Rental Amendments Act though, which, kinda sucked for them. Number 4. Solid Oak Sketches versus 2K Games. There have been a number of cases over the years where individuals have sued video game developers for using their artwork without having secured the licenses to do so. As an example, designer Judy A. Juracek recently took Capcom to court after she discovered they'd used tons of her designs in a bunch of their games. She was right to do so. Artists deserve to get paid when companies use their work. In the case of Solid Oak Sketches versus 2K Games, though, we're taking a left turn into bonkers town. The tattoo licensing company decided to sue 2K back in 2020 as they claimed the depictions of LeBron James, Kenyon Martin, and Eric Bledsoe within the NBA 2K titles infringed upon their copyrights of the players' tattoos. They claimed 2K had used the artwork without permission, despite it literally being a part of the players in question, and that was unacceptable, apparently. Shockingly, the judge found in favour of 2K, who had acquired the rights to use the players' likenesses. The fact that the tattoos constituted such a small part of the game's design, weren't the main focus of the title, and that the artists who inked the players knew their work would end up in the media, all factored into the decision. I guess you could say that Solid Oak Sketches didn't ink before they acted. That's rubbish, leave that out. Number 3. Some bloke from Russia versus Bethesda. Most gamers have at some point in their lives spent far too long playing a video game. For most of us, the damage extends to a missed meal or a slightly sleepy day at work, but for one unnamed chap from Russia, his addiction to one particular game cost him his wife and his job, or so he claimed. In 2015, an unnamed 28-year-old man from Krasnoyarsk, Russia, attempted to sue Bethesda because he claimed Fallout 4 was, quote, too addicting. It transpired he'd binge-played the game for 3 weeks straight, failing to show up for work or spend time with his spouse. As a result, he was fired from his job, and his wife left him. Rather than groveling to his boss and begging his wife for another chance, though, the man decided the best course of action was to sue Bethesda. He sought 500,000 rubles, which equated to about $7,000 or £4,500 in damages for the emotional turmoil he experienced and for the health issues he claimed to have faced due to a lack of sleep. Sadly, the outcome for this case is unclear, but considering there were probably other factors at play when it came to the loss of his job and wife, we suspect that the man didn't get very far. Number 2. The Romantics versus Activision Blizzard. If you're unfamiliar with Detroit rock band The Romantics, then we can't really say we're surprised. The group had some success in the 80s, but since then they've more or less flown under the radar. That is until 2007, when the band filed a lawsuit against Activision, Red Octane, Harmonix, and Wave Group Sound over the cover of their song What I Like About You in Guitar Hero Encore Rocks the 80s. The Romantics were upset that the cover version sounded, quote, virtually indistinguishable from the authentic version, end quote, and might make consumers believe that, quote, the band had actually recorded the music and endorsed the product. The Romantics' demands, well, money, naturally, but they also requested that the game be pulled off of shelves. Fortunately, Activision were able to obtain an injunction to prevent sales of the game from being stopped, and the case was thoroughly dismissed by the judge. It turned out the Romantics no longer held the copyright for the song, and that it had been properly licensed for the game by EMI Entertainment World. Hopefully someone also pointed out to the band that covers are meant to sound like the original, otherwise they're not really covers anymore, are they? And number 1, Digital Homicide versus Jim Sterling. Over the years, we here at TripleJump have shared our thoughts on many video games, and let's just say that they haven't all been positive. We're not alone though, and although you may not always agree with the opinions found in critical reviews, if given with honesty and integrity, they can go a long way to protecting consumers from shoddy games. Still, a bad review can be quite upsetting for a developer, so in 2016, Digital Homicide decided that the best way to silence their naysayers was to ensure that their studio put creativity and quality at the forefront of everything they did. I'm just kidding, they tried to sue one of the critics that had blasted their game. In November 2014, YouTuber Jim Sterling, aka the Jimquisition, uploaded a Let's Play of Digital Homicide's first game, The Slaughtering Grounds, dubbing it a worst game of 2014 contender. In response, Digital Homicide attempted to sue Sterling for assault, libel, and slander, ultimately seeking $15 million in restitution. Naturally, Sterling filed a motion to dismiss on the basis that their comments were presented as opinion, not fact. Unsurprisingly, the case was thrown out of court, which was great news not just for Sterling, but for everyone else that likes sharing their opinions on video games. If not for this precedent, we'd have been sued by Blast Entertainment years ago. Ugh.